On a global scale, Black people are not human. Hey everybody, welcome to Life with Ajene. I'm Ajene. So today I'm going to be talking about Afropessimism.
Let's do this.
This video is going to be a little bit different from the other videos you've seen in this Intro to Black Philosophy series because I'm going to be more so focusing on the topic and a bunch of different people in relation to that topic versus a mystery philosopher. And with that being said, I'm also going to be switching up the content with the philosophy videos just a little bit in general. I want to start doing a philosophy book club, a Black philosophy book club. I'm going to get a book. I'm going to rent it from my library, and I'm going to read that book chapter by chapter, and each week go over that chapter, what was in it, share some of my thoughts, how that relates to what we're going on with in life, some other things that I see that it's connected to, break down the philosophy present in it if it's not obvious itself, and yeah, just chat what that book has to say with you all.
Well, okay then.
So I'm really excited about that. But with that being said, if there's anything that you all are like, oh my gosh, please read this book. I've been wanting to read this book with somebody, or please read on this topic. I've been wanting to read on this topic with someone. Go ahead and leave a comment below and I'll check those out. I do look at my comments. And yeah, I'll just look at all those and that'll help inform what I do. I already have some books in mind, so if I get nothing, that's fine. That's fine. You can just leave a like. You can just watch, you know, that's supportive too. I appreciate whatever support you feel like offering. I'll take it. But if you have it within you to share an idea for a book, I'll also take that. So yeah, anyway, keeping in mind that I want these videos to be short, I'm gonna go ahead and get to the topic now. Let's get into Afropessimism. This topic is something that I'm talking about because someone in the comments on a past philosophy video left a comment about Afropessimism. Can I talk about it? Can I get into it? And I was actually very excited because this topic actually aligns with one of my fields of specialties, which is critical race theory. So a little background if you didn't know already, but I'm a trained philosopher. And in my philosophy program, I focus on bioethics, biopolitics, women and gender studies in relation to philosophy, and social political philosophy. And environmental philosophy too, because of those other topics and how that's relevant. But anyway, long story short, Afropessimism comes into context because it aligns with a lot of the things that are talked about in critical race theory, and there's a lot of philosophy of race influence clearly present within the Afropessimism conversation. So yeah, I'm super excited. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about this. So what is Afropessimism? Well, Afropessimism is a concept most popularly known from a book titled Afropessimism by Frank B. Wilderson III. And in this book, basically, Wilderson talks about how Black people in society are essentially the ops. Black people in society are not human.
To the no.
So, right, society itself depends on anti-Black racism. And in that anti-Black racism, Black people are noted as not human standard, right? They're a subordinate class. They are the antithesis to human, right? So like what human is rooted in denying Black people as such. As you might imagine, this has been something that sparked a lot of conversation, has been very controversial because you come up with this idea that Black people are not human subjects, are not humans. And it's like, okay, the idea, right, is this is for society to exist, Black people have to be non-human. Then what are we supposed to do with that? Right? So that's where a lot of conversations come from. Are we just always going to be in a non-human position? Some of Wilderson's talk about what to do on the other side, particularly in like interviews and things, has been that society is going to have to kind of crumble, redo itself. Like what exists as civil society right now needs to be torn down. And in a new society, we wouldn't even have categories like Black or white or all these like other races and things like that. Like society would be restructured in a way in which we acknowledge humans in a very different light and a very different lens and framework. So for things to get better, right, you have to kind of tear down what society is right now to be able to move on. I think that this is really interesting. And the thing that I wanted to touch on particularly today in this video was to touch on not so much in the Afropessimism itself and getting the conversation with that, because we can go on for days with that and I don't mind doing that. But again, just speaking from my context and my particular training philosophy, what I see in this theory and in this framework is influence from a lot of other areas in philosophy. Some areas particularly recognize philosophy, some areas not recognize philosophy, but I definitely see as being philosophy. So on track with that project, right, I want to raise up some other voices and works that might not be particularly recognized as being related, but they're definitely having influence on this work. But I will say, before I get there, what I want to note about Afropessimism itself is what parts of philosophy that's touching on, right? So we have those 4 fields of philosophy that I reference time and time again on this channel so far, but if you haven't seen that before, here we go. 4 main branches of philosophy are epistemology, ethics, logic, and metaphysics. And I would say within those 4 branches that Afropessimism is really versed in that area of metaphysics. You can definitely see it in some other spaces as well, but I think metaphysics is like a primary component of what Afropessimism is getting to, because again, with metaphysics, what we're talking about, a range of things, but broadly, what we're talking about is like existence, what that means, what it is to be, questions along that nature. And specifically what I'm thinking about and how Afropessimism comes into the conversation right now is ontology, and that's kind of what I'm touching on more so specifically in metaphysics right now, because it's a broad field, very broad. But ontology, it's the study of being. So where Afropessimism comes to that conversation and what it's touching on, right, is that what it means to be human means one thing, and what it means to be Black, it means another thing, and how those two come into conversations in civil society is really interesting when you look at them in relation to one another, and how society depends on Black subjectivity, Black subordination in particular. Yes, we're definitely working within an ontology there. Now, some of these other works that I wanted to touch on in reference to the Afropessimism conversation that I think are important to raise and highlight come from various spaces. So there's 4 main people that I want to raise up in conversation of Afropessimism that I think that if you're looking at Afropessimism and you're really interested in that conversation, that I think you should also go look at some of these other people and some of their conversations as well. Upright, I'm gonna say that these are the people that like are my first thoughts of what comes to mind in my training and what I think. But I think that conversation is open, so if you come up with some other people and you think some other people are also relevant to this conversation and there's connections that you see and hear, put it in the comments. Like, I would love to be in conversation with you all about some things, and maybe there's something that I don't know and I'm missing and you know, and we can share and talk about that together. I also want to acknowledge the fact that there aren't any women on my list, and it bothers me to my core.
No!
I know that there's women that I can reference, but these are my first thoughts, and I'm sticking to it. And I'm challenging myself mentally right now to go and seek out some women that have talked on these topics, because I know they have. And in particular, I feel like from what I do know in the field and in the space of these topics of Black being, Black subjectivity, Black bodies in relation to colonialism and colonial structures, I think of Saidiya Hartman, I think of Harriet Washington, I think about Dorothy Roberts, I think about Anita Allen, who's formerly a philosopher. So those are some women, but to go into my specific lists and texts that I'm referencing right now that come to first mind, they're all men. I'm sorry. And I say I'm sorry because I just feel like in philosophy, we often are caught in the space of highlighting men and forgetting about women's voices. And as a woman in philosophy, like, it's really frustrating. So I think that the apology is well deserved. If you think I'm doing too much, I'm not sorry about that. But yeah. You may or may not get what I'm talking about, but I'm moving on.
I said what I said.
Anyway. Okay, so first person that I want to talk about that I think is important to recognize in relation to this work and then this framework of Afropessimism is Derek Bell. So this is the one person that's not typically recognized as a philosopher. So Derek Bell is acknowledged as a critical race theorist. And in critical race theory, what you need to know is that is a field of critiquing the law and the legal framework from a lens of what it means in relation to race. That's my baby intro into it. It's much more complicated than that, but Derek Bell is noted often as a founding father of critical race theory. He's a professor at Harvard Law, eventually moved on to University of Oregon, I believe, as dean, and just incredible scholar. Has influenced many big names in critical race theory. There's a particular work from Derek Bell. The book that I'm referencing is called Faces at the Bottom of the Well, The Permanence of Racism. In this book, right, he talks about this concept of the permanence of racism. And what that means is that racism is not going anywhere. It will always be a thing that we have to contend with. We can't just overcome racism. It's something that will always be there. And so acknowledging that, then you move a certain way in society, understanding that, versus trying to work towards abolishing it. It's just, Bell's it's not going anywhere, so deal with it. And I think that this is important to the Afropessimism context because, again, in a sense, right, we're talking about how human society depends on Black subjectivity. And so, so long as society exists, right, the connection to Bell is that racism is going to exist.
I'm not leaving.
I'm not leaving.
Now, right, on the Afropessimism end, if you get rid of society as it stands and come up with something else, something new, then maybe you could overcome that. But that's also not a given. So I just think this concept of Bell and the permanence of racism, that idea that racism will always be a thing, it's core to human nature, essentially. I think that that is something that is clearly present as an influence in this kind of work. Yeah, Bell's, I think, a very clear influence on the concept of Afropessimism. Racism isn't going anywhere. Okay, next. 3 individuals I want to refer to are typically recognized philosophers. So this is interesting, right? Because usually I talk about people who are not recognized as philosophers on this channel. And the first one I'm going to reference is not Black. But I think that the voice is very important. And the voice is also very influential and important to a lot of Black folks who do philosophy. So the first person I'm going to reference is Michel Foucault. In this category of people who are recognized philosophers. And specifically what I want to reference his work as being influential to Afropessimism is the history of sexuality. So in this text, right, Foucault talks about how biopolitics is a structure in which politics has power over things like life. And by means of having power over things like life, that means politics has power over death as well, right? It can give and take away life. This is huge. It sounds simple, but this concept is huge, and acknowledging that power can equate to a life or death status for society, and certain people having life circumstances given to them, having death circumstances given to them, and handed out over the structure of a political society. And who's ever in power over that political society has a say over who lives and dies, and who lives in a state of life over who lives in a state of death. That is huge. And so that influences some of these other folks that I'm talking about. I'll start with actually Achille Mbembe. So Mbembe has a text called Necropolitics. And in Necropolitics, Mbembe talks about this concept of death worlds.
Say what?
Right? And so what you'll have in a political society is a creation of worlds within that society that are revolved around the state of death.
What?
Either being terrorized by death, being economically structured around death. There's the whole thing, right? Necro itself means death. And so the book being titled Necropolitics is dealing with talking about how politics and political society, political structure works around the concept of death. How death works within political society. And so, again, connecting that back to Foucault and talking about biopolitics, right? And political society having the power to administer life and death to different citizens and people and folks within that civil society. Well, Mbembe talks about, okay, yes, let's talk about like that death state, right? And Mbembe talks about how necropolitics entails a subjugation of life to the power of death, right? So death is like the powerful thing that we're talking about, and life is subject to who we administer death to, who we don't administer death to. And again, this connects back to what we talk about with Afropessimism and Wilderson, because when we talk about that political society and civil society being dependent on Black subordination and anti-Black racism, there's also an element of violence there. And in that violence, right, that violence crafts and creates a structure of, well, that's how you treat the Black folks versus the humans, right? And so in this subordinate position, in this less than human status as Black folks, there's an element of violence that exists in that non-human state, and that is expected and that is aligned with that non-human state. And so these ideas of political society having power over violence and death is very relevant to this conversation in Afropessimism, in which anti-Black violence is key to society and understanding who's human and who's not. And the last person that I'll reference in relation to this is Frantz Fanon. So Fanon's particular work that I'm referencing here in relation to Afropessimism that I think is very clearly present in informing the work, Black Skin, White Masks. So in this book, Fanon basically talks about how Black folks are seen through a white lens. That's my simple way of describing the text. How this relates to Afropessimism is in talking about seeing that Black body from the white gaze and identifying man versus the Black man. So Fanon like distinguishes those two. And I think that Black Skin, White Mask is like a core text that you should read before getting into Afropessimism. So it's something that you're like, oh, I definitely want to look further into this. Sounds really interesting. Like, I'm really engaged. Like, this conversation sounds really important. I would recommend strongly to read Black Skin, White Mask before you read Afropessimism. I think that it would give you a really informed take on what you're reading and be able to help conceptualize it a little bit better. If society depends on Black people being violated and being in a subordinate position, right, it's important to understand more about like what that position looks like to the human, right? And understanding like what does that like even look like? How do humans understand this space and the rights that they have to administer life or death or violence or non-violence, like right over this status, over this other part of society. Whew. So yeah, this is my quick take on Afropessimism. And I think in particular in reference to today and some of the things that you see going on in society, I think that Black subordination is always on the table. I think that what we're seeing in terms of some of the actions being taken against some groups of people right now based on race and ethnicity is rooted in a history of how they've treated Black folks. I also think that this isn't completely removed from what could potentially happen to Black folks, and to also understand and recognize that Black folks are a part of the communities being targeted right now. Blackness is global. That concept of Blackness, and particularly in relation to Afropessimism, right? That's a global thing. We're on a global scale. Black people are not human. And when you have a civil society that is structured like that, like you can have anyone in a non-human status and understand that violence and death is acceptable for that group, and that society depends on continuing to enact violence and subordination and violent conditions on that group, then it only makes sense then when you start to expand the umbrella a little bit into other groups out of convenience, because then you have a understanding of there being a nature within the society to propel and raise society through means of subordination of other classes and groups. Again, very engaging conversation. I think that it's very important for the field of talking about race. I think that it's getting us to just focus on some of these structures that are tearing us up from the inside out. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want more on Afropessimism, any of those scholars that I reference, anything that just it's coming to your mind, please leave a comment below. Okay, see y'all later. Have a good one. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.